Hello, and welcome to Bits and Bots, AI Builder Stories, a show about practical lessons learned from building AI for product managers, engineers, designers, and folks interested in artificial intelligence. In this very first episode, my co-host Ankur Goyal and I interview each other about our experiences building with AI across a range of companies and startups. In future episodes, we'll be bringing on special guests to talk about their experience building with AI, as well as building some things together live on the show. This is an experiment. We'd love your feedback on what you'd like to see, so check out bitsandbots.ai for more. Thanks so much, and let's jump in. Super excited to be here for our very first episode of our awesome AI show. I'm super excited to be doing this with you, Ankur. I feel like I've learned so much about AI from talking to you.
Yeah, me too. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Some of the motivation for this show for us was we've both been working on AI for a long time. And there's a ton of amazing content in the AI and machine learning space online, classes, podcasts, videos, everything. And a lot of it is either extremely deeply technical or very, very high level. And I think we both felt as we were trading notes about what we're learning with generative AI that there's actually not that much content out there that is by builders for builders around practical lessons learned, what's working, what's not, what's the methodology. It's just really helpful to compare notes. And so I'm really excited about this as a way to take some of those learnings and share them with others. And hopefully this is a really fun place for PMs, designers, engineers, folks excited about AI, trying to learn more about what does it take to actually build, to just get deeper into it and get a sense of what the challenges are in working with AI day to day and turning it into real products and real features.
Yeah, it's really strange how that hasn't changed, by the way. This is the end of year 6 for me for AI, working on it full time. And when I started working on it, I was working on relational databases and noticed that there's this cool AI thing, and almost exactly the same thing was true. It was less hyped and it was harder to use than it is now, but there was a lot of hype still around like computer vision and some demos and stuff that you could play with, especially like Google APIs and whatnot, and then papers. And if you were a practitioner, especially a data practitioner, which was the key role at the time for people that were managing data in organizations, this has changed now. I think data is a part of like everything in organizations now, and application builders are working with data a lot too. But again, at the time, there's this big gap between that middle area of like useful stuff beyond the surface, but not super ML PhD technical. And the goal with Impero was actually to solve that. And we were definitely too early in trying to solve it. It's just interesting to see how, even though the scope and impact for AI has grown so much in the past 6 years, that chasm hasn't really filled in.
Totally. Love to get into Impera and your whole backstory and talk about what's changed over time as well.
Awesome. I still feel like an imposter who just started learning about this stuff.
Why is that?
Well, I guess I don't have an ML PhD, so that definitely contributes to it. But when I started working on ML stuff, there were people that had been working on it for a really long time already. And deep learning was the new thing. It was similar in spirit of, the sort of magical solution to everything that LLMs are now, with some slightly different properties. Like, to make any use of deep learning, you needed a lot of data as a prerequisite, but still like the same sort of magical technique or tool that can solve everything. And I don't know, I just felt like when I entered, I was learning so much and trying to learn so much. And I still feel that way, I think.
I can definitely understand that. Let's go back to the beginning for you, Ankur. I'm curious, you've been a startup founder, CEO, you run the AI team at Figma, you've had a very successful run. What brought you into software engineering to begin with? When did your sort of engineering story and AI story begin?
Like many other similar people to me, I wanted to be a doctor when I was growing up. My parents are doctors, and before that, our family was, farmers and store people and, whatever. And so it's a big piece of pride for my family to be educated in medicine. And then I took biology, AP Bio, and I just hated it. I hated memorizing things. There was very little logic to anything that was going on, and my brain just sort of rejected the discipline. And at the same time, I took this linear algebra class at the University of Pittsburgh, and it blew my mind.
This was
Not,
back in high school, is that right?
yeah,
So you're growing up in Pittsburgh.
exactly. And again, like many folks, I ran out of math classes, and so I went to the local university to try to find more. And first of all, working with matrices by hand is kind of like programming. You're, like doing one operation, but manipulating a lot of things at once. And so I found that pretty fun. But we got to actually learn how PageRank worked in the class. And at the same time, I was also reading a book called SICP, Structured Interpretation of Computer Programs, which teaches you how to program in Lisp. And I had this moment, I think it was over Christmas break or something, where I implemented PageRank in Lisp. And I mean, every switch that can light up in your brain and make you happy, like every dopamine receptor was firing like crazy. I was just, it was unbelievable to be able to create something like that and have my own mini version of Google, like obviously not the same thing, but just be able to create like that. And I contrasted that with my experience memorizing approximate facts in biology and so on, and realize like, no, this is actually my calling.
For those who aren't familiar, do you want to explain what PageRank is? And I'm curious also what you did your version on back then.
So PageRank is a pretty straightforward algorithm that basically looks at a graph or a network of nodes and their relationships, and using some fancy math, but not using machine learning, it computes a network score for every node in the graph based on how much other nodes point to that one. And so if you build a website and a lot of other websites link to you, that contributes to your score in PageRank. And what's interesting about PageRank is that if the pages that link to you themselves have a high score, that actually results in an even higher score. But bootstrapping that whole thing and figuring it out is quite difficult. And then making it performant is also really difficult. So we did PageRank by hand, and we read the paper and learned about how it worked by hand in the class. And then I implemented a version of it in Lisp. And like every other angsty high school teenager, I made in an Excel spreadsheet a social network graph of everyone in my class and who liked everyone else, and then computed everyone's PageRank. And rest assured, mine was very low.
That's great. So you had a who liked who the most, so who became the most popular person according to PageRank. Very practical use of AI in high school.
Yeah, yeah.
And what did you do after college?
I went to CMU and studied computer science, and I took this class that a lot of other CMU people will attest to being, if not the best, one of the best classes, called operating systems, where you basically spend 6 weeks and build an operating system. You have, you get a virtual machine and some hex codes that tell you where the video driver expects pixel memory to be populated and stuff like that. And you just do it. There's nothing else. That blew my mind. I feel very fortunate to be able to say this, but as I took that class, I sort of saw the rest of my life kind of falling in place. Like, man, this kind of stuff is, in particular systems, is just so interesting to me. I haven't been bored since I took that class. After that, I interned at Microsoft, experienced some of the stuff at large scale, but realized that the amount of effort I got to put into work every day was unsatisfying. And searching for that feeling of working on operating systems, but in a professional capacity, led me to dropping out the next summer and joining MemSQL as employee number 2. Working on a database system from scratch is kind of very similar to working on an operating system, but the next 5.5 years of doing that was just all of this stuff that I really love working on, but with so many other added things, like getting to work with customers and figure out how to strategically prioritize things and recruit some really amazing folks, especially on the engineering side. And just
you gotta slow down for a second. You dropped a big bomb there, which I didn't even know, which is you dropped out of college?
Yeah.
How did your parents feel about that?
They were not happy. They called me every weekend for almost, I think, 4 years, and I took some classes in the background. So I technically now have my degree, um, but yeah, they were not happy about that.
How was it going from a social college context to employee number two at an early stage startup?
Not too different. I think CMU is a really interesting place. It's extremely academic. Everyone's basically working all the time. The social aspects of being in San Francisco versus Pittsburgh were amazing. The food is much better, the weather is much better, and you're just I know San Francisco has a lot of problems, but it's a very open-minded place with a lot of nerds. And that was just amazing. So, I don't know, I feel like at CMU I was always working, and if I wasn't working, I was hanging out with friends, and it was kind of the same at MemSQL.
That's awesome. And where did your AI story begin?
So at MemSQL, towards the end of my time there, things like AlexNet started to become really popular. And in particular, deep learning became this sort of catch all tool where people started to think, wow, all these problems that were really hard to solve with ML and maybe required someone or a team of experts to develop a custom solution. Now you just throw deep learning at the problem and it'll get solved. Sounds familiar, right? As a systems person, what I saw is, wow, okay, deep learning is this thing that no longer requires you to have ML expertise to be able to benefit from the value of ML theoretically, but in practice, that's very hard to do. And so that gap, I kind of got interested in it for a while at MemSQL. We built some interesting features, and now MemSQL is called single store, and there's some really interesting features like the vector stuff that they're doing that enable AI. But that's how I originally started getting into it. Again, way too early, probably much before anything practical was possible. Um, the original idea behind Impura stemmed from that, which is how do you make something as easy as a relational database to use, but that lets you manipulate and work with data with the added benefits from machine learning.
So you're at MemSQL for a while. You had this emerging belief that deep learning was happening, was sort of a new frontier. What led you to leave and start your own company?
Yeah, that was partly just my interest started to shift into this world of what happens beyond the sort of basics of relational databases. And again, maybe it's a theme like I feel like I'm too early to a lot of things, but after I left MemSQL, this whole big data thing happened. It was already underway actually, but just kind of considered a failure. And then Snowflake came around and Databricks started becoming more popular. And then this whole big data thing happened. So actually, it turns out there was a lot left to do with just classic data warehousing in the context of the cloud. But combination of that and always wanting to start a company, but not feeling ready and also feeling super committed to what I was working on at MemSQL. The opportunity hadn't felt right for a long time, but it started to feel like, okay, I've done this for a while. I wouldn't feel like I'm abandoning the team by doing this. So let me pursue these new interests. And that's sort of how it came about. We started by reading a bunch of blog posts and stuff about computer vision that, wow, computer vision is going to be the thing that every enterprise needs to do. And there must be a lot of problems around it. And we realized that actually isn't the case. We spent some time helping companies manage image and video data and realized that every company has a slightly different problem. Actually, the use cases that people use databases for, powering applications and internal analysis, were distinct from how people wanted to use images. And so the way we were thinking about the problem and the solution weren't really a good fit. In retrospect, I learned the hard way through Impura that you really shouldn't be taking technology and trying to find the problem that fits it. Working backwards from a real problem is a much better way to formulate startup ideas, but you live and learn. Eventually, we found that there was a lot of challenge around working with documents, especially in places like insurance companies and accounting departments of most companies and so on. and that technology wise at the time, a combination of language and computer vision was a really good solution to the problem. Now, this is at this point 2 or 3 years ago, and it's super interesting looking back on it now because today you can take an invoice, remove all of the visual information, like literally copy paste the text, probably screw up some things along the way, feed it into GPT-4 and get a perfect transcription of it. At the time, that was nowhere near possible. Most companies were either selling pre-trained models that didn't work on most customers' data or training models for customers on literally thousands of annotated invoices. Some companies had that and were willing to solve the problem, but for most companies, that was not worth the cost or the effort. And so our innovation was using a combination of different models, including a non-deep learning model that learned on the fly based on your documents. And it had some limitations and so on, but it solved the problem really well. However, again, it's funny to look at it in retrospect because now you'd reach for a totally different way of solving it.
I remember the very first time we met, you told me anyone who was working on machine learning more than 2 years ago was using totally obsolete technology.
Yeah.
And I can totally see that through your story on how that tech worked.
It's just funny to think about. But there's some things that don't change, like the ways in which rigor is valuable and the times not to be rigorous in machine learning and AI software. I think those principles are kind of the same. I like to think that every time you're running a prompt, and there's actually some research that suggests this is somewhat true, but every time you're running a prompt, you're essentially training the model to perform a certain way or perform a certain task. And when I say prompt, I mean templated prompt, not an individual prompt. And so if you kind of think about prompt engineering like model development and think about testing prompts the same way that people have been testing machine learning models for some time, and think about formulating the uncertainty for what prompts can produce the same way that machine learning practitioners have been thinking about uncertainty, then you can build much better software. So I think those things, carry over, and hardcore ML people who are willing to embrace the new way of doing things have an opportunity to be ultra valuable in companies as they figure this stuff out.
That makes a lot of sense. If you think of AI or machine learning as a black box, you give a bunch of inputs, you expect a bunch of outputs. The way the internals of the box work are very different now than they were a few years ago. But how you evaluate that box should be very similar.
If you've worked on ML for a while, no one knows how anything really works, right? But you sort of develop this intuition about what the model is able to figure out and what it can't. And I think the ML people that have struggled with LLM stuff, they have their intuitive understanding of how the black box worked pre LLMs, and they try to apply that post LLMs to understand the limits of LLMs or predict what it might be able to do well. Those people struggle. On the other hand, there are people that totally accept that the black box works differently and they relearn the black box, but carry over their statistical methods and rigorous way of thinking about uncertainty and engineering skills, and they're flourishing quite well.
I know we derailed a little bit from your background. How did you end up at Figma?
Figma acquired us, which was awesome. Very grateful to have that opportunity. So that's how we found our way from Impera to Figma. It turns out that the problem of extracting data using language and computer vision is actually quite similar to some of the things that we're solving at Figma.
Figma's just started to talk about AI. Config happened recently, a bunch of really cool demos about what's coming. To the extent you're able to talk about it, what are you excited about with AI in Figma?
I think the thing I'm most excited about is that Figma has the opportunity to provide a much richer user experience that helps our professional audience, which is designers, and then eventually a broader audience, use AI in a very rich and interactive way to improve the design process. If you think about the areas where AI has been successful to date, I personally think the best product is Copilot. I use Copilot, all day,
GitHub
every day.
Copilot?
GitHub Copilot, yeah. I guess now there's a bunch of pilots, but what's interesting is that in some ways it's beautiful, in other ways it's limiting. Code is just a stream of tokens, kind of like what goes in and comes out of a model, or exactly like that. And Copilot is, through a number of very clever, subtle UX things, it sort of maps that paradigm into how you write code and inserts code at just the right places and just the right time. And that's super cool. But if you think about the user experience in Figma, it's two-dimensional. There's a ton of tools in Figma. There's like a toolbar, on the left and on the right and on the top and on the bottom. There's so many different places that things can show up. And you have a cursor, but everything doesn't necessarily need to happen where your cursor is. It's also a very visual product. When you insert things or when you try to interact with the user, it's a lot more obvious and playful and engaging than the opportunity that you have inserting characters maybe elsewhere in a file in code. And so while I think many of the problems that Figma is solving are similar to problems that others have solved, the opportunity to actually build an incredibly rich user experience where designers can be supremely more effective in the ways that Figma has really succeeded, which is building a really great user experience for designers and now others to be really productive. I think that's what is so exciting about it.
What have been some of the biggest challenges for Figma AI?
Privacy and how we use data is a really challenging thing. There's some obvious no-nos, right? There are a lot of competitors that use Figma, companies that compete with each other that use Figma. Those companies and designers don't want their work to be stolen and repurposed by other companies. GitHub walked a really fine line, which I think is being litigated right now, but maybe the ship has sailed, maybe it hasn't, with training on open source code and sort of questionably navigating the licensing of it. Personally, I think it's a really hard problem to solve. We can't blindly train over the corpus of all data and still maintain and build the trust of customers. So that's a hard problem. Another hard problem, this one is more technical in nature. While there's been a lot of stuff with language models, Figma is a fundamentally multimodal product. I think designers are impressive because they can think in terms of language and systems and visually at the same time, among many other things that are wonderful about designers. But the fact that they're so great at that is also really hard for machine learning because you need to capture and utilize both system/language information and visual information to make the best possible inference of what the user is trying to accomplish. On one hand, the most sophisticated models are pure language models. And so we're constantly thinking about the trade-off of, do we serialize this information as text and try to essentially downsample it into text and represent it that way to access a more powerful model? Or does a potentially smaller or simpler model, it's not to say that we can't train our own, super fancy models over time, but thinking practically, does a smaller or simpler model that is multimodal potentially solve the problem better because it has access to a fuller picture of what the user is trying to do? I think the third problem is something that almost every company that's reasonably large is facing, which is staring at the existential threat or opportunity of AI and rationalizing what that means for the roadmap, what that means for how we build products, what that means for what our customers want. At Figma, we think a lot about how we can make our users more effective with AI, but those users are also thinking about how to design AI features, right? So maybe there's a way we can help them with that. There's just a lot to rationalize. I don't think Figma necessarily needs transformation or anything like that. And maybe some companies do. I think Figma is in a really good spot, but figuring out how to successfully excite and engage a large group of people in a way that feels natural and productive and basically introduce this new magical capability to everyone at the company, I think that's another challenge. I know you've thought about that too.
Yeah, that definitely resonates. Oh, by the way, we probably should have said at the start, but this is our first episode figuring these things out. Everything on the show is our personal opinions, does not represent any places we currently work or have previously worked.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about how you got into AI and your journey into all this stuff. I don't even know did you study computer science?
I studied CS in college. I grew up reading science fiction, playing lots of video games, and so was always really excited about the idea of AI, even from when I was a little kid. And then went to Harvard, studied computer science and machine learning there. Was so excited about it. So actually, in my first CS class, I think was like sophomore year in high school, and I feel so lucky that my high school had a CS class because it really set me on a path. And I think if I hadn't encountered it at that point, who knows where I might have ended
Wait,
up.
wait, wait, wait. Did you have to? Was the class in Java?
It wasn't Java, yeah.
Yeah, quick aside, but my high school also had a CS class in Java, and I tried learning Java at a nerd camp the year prior, and I hated it so much that I resolved not to study computer science.
Wow.
I have nothing but respect for your perspective. It's just interesting how the same or similar experience can lead to different outcomes.
Yeah, I think for me it was I was never excited about the code or Java. I was always excited about what you could do with it.
Hmm.
And I felt like it gave me magic tricks. And I remember in high school building my first video game, which was like really simple character walks around and picks up some things. And I remember building my first web page and sending it to my friends and feeling like I was the coolest kid, which is
Oh
like
yeah,
shows how much of a geek I was. But it was this feeling of like I'm powerful and something in my head can turn into reality because of something I can do. And especially as a kid in high school, there's a lot of constraints on your life. I think at that point I didn't have a learner's permit. I couldn't drive anywhere. You're constrained physically in what you can do in the world. It really felt like getting superpowers of wow, there's like this whole universe of stuff that I can manipulate and control and explore and create and share and engage in. I got very hooked from that and then ended up studying CS in college. And I got very into very early on side projects, building things with friends. In college, I actually did a summer incubator program. Freshman year, we noticed it was really hard to talk with friends about different classes. Everyone wanted to form study groups and this kind of thing. And so a few friends and I started hacking something we called it Study Buddy, which was sort of like forums for classes in school. And we're like, this is really fun. It seems like people are liking it. Maybe we should work on this over the summer somehow. And so we applied for a program called Dream Adventures, which was a new incubator just getting started in Philly that offered 25K in seed fund and mentorship. And we got in. So we
awesome.
went to Philly in the summer and it was like, whoa, people start businesses. This is the whole world of interesting things. And what's going on? And that definitely turned me on to the startup world. And I was
This
like,
was
wow,
after your freshman year.
freshman summer in college. Yeah.
Wow.
Again, I feel super lucky because at that point, I started coding 3, 4 years before, had gotten into CS in that world. And it definitely turned me on to startups. It also made me appreciate how hard they are.
Yeah.
Um, I
I
had
wish
my
I had
first,
learned that lesson so early.
yeah, I had my first pivot that summer. We ended up leaving Study Buddy behind. I thought about dropping out actually for that and ended up coming back to school. Ended up going to Google as a software engineering intern the next summer, and then heard about this thing called product management, which was at that point still like a fairly new discipline as like a term.
Yeah, it was like the only company that sort of it seemed like had figured out it's program management there or something, right? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, their flavor is a little bit different, but it was all kind of coming up at that point. So I applied to Google, had a program for technical new grads
Hmm.
to
Was it
become
the
PM.
APM program?
That's right. Yeah. Associate product manager. And so it was this 2 year program where you could rotate through two different parts of Google, 1 year on each. And so I ended up joining that after college. And I was like, startups are hard. I would love to do another. Let me go learn from the best. Google's amazing. Super respect the company, the products, where it's going. So I was very fortunate to join that after college and spent a year on search. Even back then, I was really obsessed with AI. It was a super fun time. I worked on what was called Google Instant, where you get results while you were typing, not just
Yeah, yeah, I
these.
remember that.
And internally, I remember we called it psychic search. And we had to build whole new data centers to turn this feature on because it sent 5, 10 times the number of queries against Google's backends because it's kind of greedily searching every time you hit a keystroke. But it felt like you were going so fast. And
I was working at Microsoft on Bing, and I don't think instant search had come out yet, but we were chasing Google's real time search results, and that's what I worked on.
it was an interesting product because there was a user experience piece which felt really magical, which was having everything be so fast. But the whole thing really rode on the success of autocomplete. And the results were only as good as our guesses were, because we basically take the top guess and then run that for you. And when our guesses were very confident and accurate, it was amazing. It was like psychic search. It got you exactly what you want. When the autocomplete model failed, it was like, why are you showing me this random thing while I'm trying to type?
Is autocomplete like the ultimate UX?
In terms of,
Just, I mean, think about LLM stuff, right? Like the killer use case is still autocomplete.
I mean, it is a pretty amazing experience when a machine knows exactly what you're trying to do and helps you get there much faster. Definitely made me appreciate at that point how magical it could be and how hard it is to pull off as well. And then I rotated onto YouTube, where I worked on creator facing features, which was a ton of fun. So we actually did some very early AI generative things involving filters and face tracking for people who record and upload content on YouTube to make it easier to make things really engaging. After about 4 years at Google, I felt like I'd had an awesome time, learned a ton, and the startup itch was coming on stronger again this time. I'd always been really into video games. I'd seen how crazy the community was around Minecraft on YouTube at that time as well, which was super inspiring.
Did you stay working on YouTube after the second year?
That's right. Yeah. So I stayed there. I was like, Minecraft's awesome. I love it. It's one of the greatest game of all time. But what would it look like if Minecraft were made to be a platform first? And at the time, VR was just starting to be a thing, and I was really excited about it. I was like, this is the next frontier of entertainment. What if you could have a world that was truly immersive? So I ended up leaving, starting a company, raising a bunch of money. Around the time we were fundraising, that show Silicon Valley was going on, and there was a season about VR, and it was like too real, close to my life.
Yeah.
So we started as a VR company where you could put on a headset and build a world of clay with your hands that comes to life. Sort of, what if Minecraft was
Oh, that's super cool.
made of clay instead of blocks? And then over time, realized that your point earlier on being too early to market definitely resonates for me as well. I was like, okay, this VR thing is definitely super exciting, but really early. We had all these rigs in our office where you had a cable and a tether, and people kept tripping over themselves, and you had this massive PC you needed to run basic experiences, and it was clear it was going to be amazing, but it was so early.
Yeah.
But still believed in this dream of what's the next generation Minecraft sandbox experience. And at that point, generative tech was just starting to become interesting for visuals as well. And so generative adversarial networks
GANs, yeah,
just come out, which were this really cool idea of, what if you had a network of machine learning models where you have what's called a generator and you have a discriminator, and the discriminator's job is to say if something looks real or not, and the generator's job is to trick the discriminator so it makes things that pass for real. And you sort of train these two things together in a game, and at the end of it, you get a generator that can make plausible looking images that the discriminator can't tell if they're real or not. And I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. It's basically like deepfakes are becoming accessible now. And like, what if we had a deepfake video game? And that was the next generation Minecraft, where you could build something that looked like anything you wanted. And so we shifted the whole company and started working on really early generative image model things in the context of a video game, which was a ton of fun.
There are companies that are trying to do that now with the latest stable diffusion type stuff.
Totally. It's super exciting. The amount of stuff happening right now in gaming is incredible. And the future of gaming is going to look so different even 5 years from now. What does play look like? What does interactivity look like? Just the amount of things where it used to be stuck in an artist's head and a very expensive pipeline to make content in games, but now it's going to be much more accessible to more people to make things, is super exciting. And honestly, part of why I got into all this to begin with was like taking things from your head, making them come to life.
So how did you get to Coda?
I had a blast doing my startup. After about 5 years, decided to take a step back. And actually, a lot of the people I worked with at YouTube went on to found Coda, which is a all-in-one document. It's sort of like Google Docs on steroids, where it can bring data, integrations, visuals, writing all in one place for your team. I've been an early user of it because I knew a lot of the team, and I was totally addicted. Half of my open tabs were Coda Docs. I was using it at work and my personal life all the time. And I was like, this thing's super compelling, future of productivity. And so I was really excited to make it even better. And I really respected the team as well. So as I started to think about what was the next chapter, it was high on my list. So I joined Coda about 3 years ago now. We've been through a super interesting period of growth. I think I joined employee 70, we're 200 plus now. Worked on a ton of different things here, from internal data and tooling to our core growth loops and product-led growth, end-to-end optimizations across go-to-market and product, to our ecosystem where we launched a web-based IDE so people could write code in their browser and basically ship plugins, or we call them packs, on top of the Coda platform, which is super cool.
Does it use VS Code?
It uses Mono.
Oh, interesting. My journey at Figma started with AI, but it doesn't sound like you started working on AI at Coda. I'm kind of curious how that came about and how you found yourself into leading AI for the company.
The primary reason I joined. I was super excited about where it was going. I think at the time I joined, there were small parts of AI, but it kind of wasn't the main thing. And I think that made sense to me. The core thesis of the company is everyone runs their work in docs, sheets, and slides, and these are completely siloed from each other, along with being siloed from all your other tools. And that's a false division. And it's so much better if everything's all in one place and interoperable and sort of living. I was really excited about that. And as I was here, I was still keeping a close eye on the AI space, still really passionate about it. GPT-3 came out. I was like, oh, this is really cool, but it's still kind of hard to use. And then around November of last year, I mentioned we had this PAX platform where anyone could easily build an integration. The API for DALL-E was launched. And one engineer on a Friday afternoon built a Coda pack in 30 minutes that hooked it up. And it was amazing. You could build stories inside of a Coda doc with a mix of GPT-3, which was a little bit hard to set up, but still pretty compelling, and DALL-E. And I started using it with my 4-year-old son to make bedtime stories. And I was like, wow, this is accessible, pretty compelling, still a little brittle on the language side, but this is going to be the future. So we had a sprint to basically...
And this is pre-ChatGPT.
Yeah, so this was pre-ChatGPT. So we packaged up the pack and a bunch of templates and shipped it on Product Hunt. And within a few weeks, it actually became our number 4 integration on the platform, which was like way more successful than we expected. People were using the pack for all sorts of things. They were categorizing data in tables. They were having it write content for them and really scaling it up as well, which was super interesting. And then a few weeks after that, ChatGPT came out and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so we had a hackathon shortly after that at the company, which is a big ritual for Coda. Every quarter, everyone gets together for a couple of days and sort of can work on whatever they want. Usually the one rule of it is you can't actually ship anything. And so it's intended to make you think a bit more long-term, experimental, risky. And so in part because ChatGPT had come out, everyone was really excited about AI. We had a massive group of people. I think it was like 12 people hacking on 6 different ideas in AI for 2 days. And we came up with some stuff that was like super exciting, ended up winning the hackathon. And then in our Q1 board meeting in January, we took the OpenAI pack and some of the hackathon results to share some update. And like ChatGPT came out, blowing up. Here's our AI stuff we've been doing. And the board was like, yeah, this sounds great. Do more of that. And so we officially started an AI team at that point, which was just 4 engineers, 1 designer, 1 PM, which was me. Tiger team, move as fast as we could. We announced alpha for Code AI in February and grew that to a beta a few months later. And the team's grown a lot since then as well.
Yeah, I can probably speak for a lot of other people, but I remember when that beta came out, I was like, holy shit, that's like actually a cool AI product. I remember you like, it was almost like a 1990s Microsoft thing where you like just, you were sitting there with the computer and you like went through a bunch of examples and you're like, it can do this and it can do this and it can do this and it can do, that was just awesome. I remember that. That was actually how I first heard of you and then got connected shortly after.
Yeah, it was a fun video to make. It was shortly after we had formed the team. We had an early prototype working and we were excited to start testing with real users. And so we wanted to release the story, start to get people into it. And one of the things I was really excited about with it and still am is Code AI is this work assistant. And it can not just help you write, but help you with all of your tasks and make progress. I think Coda has been a uniquely awesome surface for those types of things, which has been really fun.
Cool.
It's been challenging as well. You know, working with these language models, it's amazing what they can do. And it's also amazing when they get messed up. And it's because they're so good so much of the time. It's like you kind of forget sometimes how broken they can be fairly easily as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's one of the weird things, by the way, about AI 2.0, if you will.
What was 1.0?
I'm operating relative to my own, newbiness. So for me, 1.0 was like the deep learning wave. When I, back in the day, got into AI stuff. But the default is that things didn't work. and then you'd spend months toiling away at a problem, and then it would sort of work. And so it's definitely strange to me in the best possible way that now it like mostly works and then it doesn't work. Something that fails occasionally is like somewhat similar to something that fails often, but it's weird just because it's so powerful now and it actually does work, and yet the same feeling exists.
It's been interesting too. Sometimes it's really small changes that make a big difference. Like for us, you can have really rich things in Coda. You can have headers, you can have bullets, you can have checkboxes, you can have tables. Tables can have column types. These things are part of what makes Coda really powerful, but they can also be sometimes a pain to set up. When we had that first video you saw, we showed, all right, like what if you could just ask Coda to build you a solution that's the perfect piece of software, the perfect doc that has a bunch of logic on it for your use case, like a task tracker like Jira, but with a timer on it, as an example, or your Gmail, but sorted by your Salesforce opportunity size and join these data sets in Coda table. One of the things we found as we were working on that problem is, first off, it's really hard to get it right the first time. And so you can't just have a prompt that does a giant thing for you. You want to evaluate, you want a little thing before you do a long thing. You want a little feedback loop, you're on the right track. And so that was a challenge.
By the way, that's no different than other software. I think pretty consistently, users prefer the trade-off where they have instant feedback that's partial, like instant search, right? Compared to something that might produce a great result, but might take some time.
Totally. One of the challenges for us, sort of like you mentioned with Figma AI, of how do you represent these more visual, complex structures to a language model, which doesn't necessarily know about them, is we had a similar challenge where you could ask for a doc. Docs could have header images, they have titles, they have subtitles, they have tables with names. What do you do for all these things? One big hack unlock for us was starting to think of things that we generate as Markdown. And so Markdown's kind of an intermediate format. You can use them in GitHub READMEs or anything else. It's just a textual way to represent visual hierarchy. Adding that one prompt wrapper of make sure you always give it a Markdown, suddenly you could get tables as basic tables, or you can get headers and checkboxes, because it turns out Coda already had a Markdown importer. We already had logic to parse that and turn that into something. And so that was one example where we had this big vision of this sort of solution builder. And actually the most helpful, shortest step there was, let us help you incrementally build one page, and we'll do that in a way where we can generate native building blocks.
What's sort of interesting about it is it's not that different from working with a child. The model can think about tables. That it probably has the reasoning capacity to solve the problem, but it's hard to communicate it in a way that reliably produces the result that you're looking for. And so just like you might assign a child a practice task to prove that they understand the larger task, right? Or you might give a new employee a small warm-up bug to fix before they fix the bigger thing. I've continued to be fascinated by this sort of analogy with how we treat other people and how we've learned to work with other people to what AI is now, presenting itself as. And I'm not someone who believes it's sentient at the moment and stuff like that. It's just, these are analogies to be taken only on the surface level or to help, build better software.
Yeah, I'm pretty conflicted on it personally. I definitely think on the one hand, AI is like an intern, and you get more context and you show a few examples, it does much better, and you can sort of use language to interact with it. On the other hand, I was thinking about your comment earlier, where you're like, autocomplete is maybe like the best manifestation of AI. I think it's true, but it's also the worst. And that's true of language models as well. I think natural language is a terrible interface. It has no affordances. It doesn't tell you what's possible. It doesn't tell you what's not possible.
Right.
And I think one of the biggest learnings on the Coda AI side is those are actually two different problems. What's possible and what's not possible are both really hard problems with natural language. And they're really hard to teach people. I remember we had one user study where someone was interacting with Coda AI and they asked it what was the balance in their bank account. And it completely blew my mind because they had never authenticated their bank account. I was like, the thing was so smart. It felt so personalized. The context it was giving, they kind of forgot. How do you have this really powerful model and you set guardrails on it? Actually, no, we don't know how to do those things right now. And some of the things we know how to do, and maybe some will come over time. That's what the models can't do. And then on what the models can do, autocomplete helps. but it is also still pretty brittle. And so we've done a bunch of small things that have made a huge impact after launch. We had drop downs like, what tone would you like? And we have a few different examples like, how long would you like this to be? And what format do you want in? Do you want checkboxes? People didn't realize you could get checkboxes out. And that's actually really delightful and helpful. Nothing's preventing them to with text, but it's very hard to teach people that.
To draw another analogy, most people wouldn't be able to use DOS today. However, people are doing much more powerful things without the textual interface of DOS with computers than what they were doing with DOS back in the day. So I feel like we're still in the DOS era where the bare metal form of working with AI is text in and text out. And so the obvious ways of exposing that in a product are text in and text out. But you guys and others that are in the text world can iterate with that as a starting point and build more sophisticated things. I think companies that are outside of the text world are doing highly constrained things like classification. Oh, here's, a user has a question. What part of our website might be able to answer their question or something like super simple stuff, right? And those are ultra constrained, but the LLM performs much better than something heuristic or deterministic would. I'm really excited about what software will look and feel like as it evolves.
I think that's one of the biggest questions for me on the product and design side, which is what are those patterns going to look like for interacting with AI? And obviously we have, the generic language one. I think to your point, we also have the really narrow scalpel, the X-Acto knife, the one-click buttons that do a very specific thing in really focused scenarios. I do think there's probably a few other patterns that we just don't have yet as an industry. And I'm really curious to see what that will look like. The other piece I'm really excited about is malleable software in general.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the fact that AIs can produce code or can produce primitives that can operate as logical blocks is amazing. The experience of software engineers, to your point, and Copilot is already really different, but that's going to change even more in the coming years.
Yeah, all the nefarious people building malicious software have really set up AI for success in that way, right? Because Chrome is an amazing environment in which to allow a model to perform code generation and not completely destroy a user's computer or their website or anything like that.
Excited on this show to bring on different people solving this problem in different ways, see how they're approaching it as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, super fun digging in more to your own history, Ankur. Maybe we'll pause here for today. Really excited to be doing the show together. And again, we'd love feedback. This is us getting started, trying things out. What would you like to see? We'll edit this later to have the name of our show in it and our website and things like that, where you can get in touch and send ideas.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so excited. And I can't wait to explore the different flavors that the show could become.
Cool. Thanks so much. See you next time.